So I know it's late. You've heard a lot of speeches. I'm only going to be 4.2 minutes. So I'm good at keeping time. So if you just listen to me for 4.2 minutes, I'll get off the stage. You can have your dessert. And I want to tell you about 3 people tonight. 4.2 minutes, 3 people. Each faced prejudice because of where they came from and because of how they looked, and each responded to that treatment in different ways. The first, which is fitting because my mom and sister happen to be right over there, is a story about my dear father. My dad came to America without much, indeed so little that he had to take a boat from England, where he had been for a couple years after leaving India. And his boat arrived in Newport News, Virginia in 1960. Now, my dad told me before he passed away that when he landed, that there were bathrooms, literally marked for colored people, and other bathrooms for whites. And he honestly didn't know which one to pick. And so he picked the white one, figuring it was better. My dad had literally just landed on America's shores, and this was his first experience with the America that he had set sail to in search of a better life for him and his family. He had no access to the law, no access to lawyers, so he just did what he thought was right in the face of overt racism. That era of separate unequal was just 55 years ago. The second man, the second story, Gordon Hirabayashi, Japanese-American college student, 1942, Seattle, University of Washington. Now, he was a Quaker, believed very strongly that he had a duty to follow the law, but also to resist unjust laws. So when he saw FDR's order ordering the internment and curfews for 120,000 Japanese Americans, he went and violated the order, and then he went and turned himself into the FBI. And the FBI said, "What are you doing here? We didn't see you. Go home." He said, "No, this order is wrong. Arrest me. I violated the law." So they arrest him. There's a trial. He defends himself at trial. And his defense is basically, this law is ridiculous. It's unconstitutional. I didn't break a valid law under the Constitution of the United States. Well, that didn't go over so well in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, so he gets convicted. But the judge says, "There's some good news for you, Gordon. We don't have funds. We're fighting this war, so we don't have funds to send you to the nearest prison camp," which is what the law would have sentenced him to, a prison camp, because the nearest one was in Tucson, Arizona, and it's 1,000 miles away. So the judge says, "Don't worry, you can go home, no problem." And Gordon says, "No, you say that I violated the law. I'm a Quaker. I got a duty to obey the law, even if I disagree with it, so I need to serve my sentence." The judge says, "I don't have the means to send you there. It's cost too much to get you to Tucson." So what does Gordon do? He hitchhikes the 1,000 miles to show up at the prison camp. And he shows up late one night in Tucson, and the prison warden says, "Who are you? We don't know who you are." And he says, "I'm Gordon Hirabayashi. I've been convicted." And the guy says, the warden says, "I don't have any papers. Go home. Don't worry about it." And same thing. And Gordon goes through the whole thing. "I'm a Quaker, blah, 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 and I got to serve my sentence. Look me up." The prison warden says, "Come back tomorrow." And they look him up, and they realize that he's who he is, and so he goes and he serves his sentence. Now, Hirabayashi brought his case all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, which, influenced by the Solicitor General's briefs, upheld his conviction. It was a tragic moment in our history. I know many of you have studied the case and talked about the blame that rests on the United States Supreme Court for such a horrendous decision. But a lot of the blame rests also with the government attorneys. After all, the 9 members of the Supreme Court are generalists. It's a time of war. They don't have intelligence expertise or military affairs expertise. They have to rely on what the Solicitor General is telling them. And the Solicitor General here had suppressed all of the information showing that these laws were discriminatory and that they weren't work, that they weren't needed, that there wasn't a true Japanese-American threat. Fahey, the Solicitor General at the time, sat on all of these intelligence reports, blinding the Supreme Court to the reality on the ground. That was 1942. Now the third story, Suresh Patel, 57-year-old man. Mr. Patel comes from India to take care of his baby grandson, who had been born in Madison, Alabama. He was taking a stroll in his neighborhood a police officer violently throws him to the ground. Why? Because a neighbor had called the police saying there was a suspicious, quote, skinny black guy. Now, this story happened not in 1960 and not in 1942. It happened 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. And while we sit here and have our nice shrimp and our glasses of wine, Mr. Patel is lying partially paralyzed and may never be able to walk again. Now, Mr. Patel's not a lawyer. He's not an American citizen. He's hospital bound. And without legal resources, Mr. Patel would be entirely unable to ensure that justice is done to the very people who are supposed to protect his family's neighborhood. Now, Patel, my father, and Mr. Hirabayashi all face discrimination because of their Asian heritage. But all three of them had different reactions. Mr. Patel could not have stood up for himself or fought back without assistance. My father, on the other hand, had just landed in America. He didn't know how to fight back, so he chose the white restroom instead. And Gordon Hirabayashi, who'd been born in this country, did stand up and did fight injustice. Now, here's what the beauty of AALDEF is. It's that its resources and support extend to all three types of people. AALDEF fights for those who can't fight for themselves, like Mr. Patel, or those who don't know how to, like my father at the time. And for those who do choose to fight, the Gordon Hirabayashis of the world, AALDEF acts as a pillar of support. This organization's reach is extraordinary. It's a true honor to be part of that tonight. Thank you so much for this award.